Hundreds of years ago, if you wanted to pass through the Kitselas Canyon, you had to pay a toll. Thus, the Kitselas people became known as the toll keepers of the Skeena River. That wasn't our only advantageous practice. Archaeological research has recovered an area that holds centuries of soil cultivation and indigenous agriculture, with over 70 species of plants, a local source of food and medicines, all held within the forest garden of the Kitselas Canyon. And I'm on a journey to reclaim that knowledge, to learn about that part of my culture, that history of my people. On this episode, I'm learning about Rosehips. When you descend the Kitselas Canyon Trail towards Pebble Beach, you pass through the area where the longhouses of the village of Kitselas once stood. In this area, masses of wild roses line the path, providing a beautiful fragrance in the summer, and in the fall, an abundance of rosehips. The wild rose, also known as the Nootka rose or the bristlenose, is a perennial and can spread via seeds blown from the plant in the wind or by animals that eat the rosehips then later pass the seeds, or by root suckers, as well as by cuttings for propagation. The bushes mature in a few years. It can grow up to 6 feet tall. It is a perennial and follows the same reproductive cycle each year. In the summer, the pink roses attract pollinators. Once pollinated, the rose flowers develop into hips. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for seed maturation. The rosehip is the seed of the wild roses. The external envelope is the edible part. Wild roses are important for wildlife. Deer, elk, moose, caribou, bighorn sheep, bears, coyotes, and various rodents also eat the fruit. Squirrels, mice, beavers, and porcupine eat the twigs and leaves. Rose thickets are used for nesting and escape cover by birds, including waterfowl and small mammals. The wild rose is a plant that is well known to indigenous peoples along the western coast of Canada. In Kitselas Canyon, wild roses grow abundantly and are easily identified. During a visit to the canyon with Renee Morvan, Nishka herbalist, we found hundreds of rosehips still on the tree, even though it was very late in the year. Harvesting is simply pulling the rosehip from the branch. Be mindful of the thorns while harvesting. Wear gloves and long-sleeved tops. This year was the first time I harvested rosehips, although I had heard that they make a very nice jelly. They were easy to find. The orange-red globes stand out against the autumn foliage. I learned that the stem, end, and seeds have to be removed before drying the rosehips. So I followed those directions for drying part of this harvest. I cleaned and froze the rest of the rosehips to be prepared later in the year. To help me learn about the nutritional and medicinal properties of rosehips is traditional medicine practitioner Trish Paulson.
And they tend to grow in along the riverbanks and roads. We don't harvest from along the roads because there's contaminants that we don't want in our food products. The riverbanks are a great place to harvest them. They have they're just so that you can see the size of this in relation. It's about the size of my thumbnail probably. And then they have a skin on the outside with a pithy material. And then on the inside, they have seeds. And I'm just gonna show these to you so that you can see them. So the seeds are what you want to not eat. You want to clean them out. And then you use the pith and the skin for your jellies and your teas and your nutritional sustenance. They're very high in vitamin C, especially. They say that there's, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but they say there's the equivalent of 30 oranges worth of vitamin C in one rosehip. So vitamin C, if you're out in the woods or in a survival situation, is an essential nutrition to for your teeth and your gums and things like that. And they stand out. So if you're out in the bush and maybe needing some source of sustenance, rosehips stand out against the wintry background, and they're low enough to have easy access to. So they tend to grow up till about maybe 5 or 6 feet in the summertime, but then in the winter when they die off and they still have the berries on them, they bow down. And when things bow down, that makes it a lot easier to access them. The other thing too is that you can eat these frozen, and so they stand out against that background. And they're also a source of food for birds in the winter. So you can often follow the wildlife and see what they eat, and you will see them going after these in the wintertime. As with anything that we harvest in the summertime, when we use it in the wintertime, it's just a little taste of summer, but it's packed with nutrition and helps us get us through the winter.
Later in the year, I was able to use the frozen rosehips to make rosehip syrup. This is a very simple recipe to make your own rosehip syrup. It is becoming more common to see rosehips in commercial settings, like grocery stores, specialty stores, or delis. Rosehip tea is commercially available. And rosehips are being used to make consumables like kombucha. Why would rosehips have been part of the forest garden? There's no disputing the importance of these berries for high levels of vitamin C, A, and E. The berries can survive in an edible state throughout the winter, perhaps naturally preserved for consumption, as opposed to being stored in oolakan grease in bentwood boxes, which saves on resources, time, and energy. It can't be overlooked that rosehips are an attractant for game, including deer, moose, bear, even coyote. Twigs and leaves are eaten by beaver, porcupine. Birds, including waterfowl, have been known to nest among the wild rose thickets. This is a wide variety of animals that would be attracted to the wild roses. As we have seen with other plants grown in the Kitselas Canyon forest garden, the wild rose is a resource that can be completely used for food and medicine, including the rose petals, rose hips, leaves, bark, and roots, making items like tea, tonic, or utilitarian ways like steaming the roots to make fishnets. Overall, it is an extremely beneficial plant. And it's no shock that wild roses have a long documented history of being a popular plant used by indigenous people along the West Coast. Of course, it would have been in the forest garden, and in large quantities, because this plant is multi-beneficial. And those benefits are multi-seasonal. These are things that the Kitselas gardeners knew. Plants with these types of benefits would be wanted in closer proximity, within the forest garden of the Kitselas Canyon.